Yes. Well, it's great to be here. I'm Yolanda Fintschenko. I am the executive director of iGate. We run the Startup Tri-Valley Initiative, which is one of the ways we accomplish our mission of helping science-based startups succeed here in the Tri-Valley through events like this. We also run a hard tech incubator that is here in Livermore called Daybreak Labs, and I'm really pleased to say we have one of our panelists, Matin Hanifzadeh, is the CEO and founder of Rushnew, one of our Daybreak Labs companies. One of our most ardent supporters and cheerleaders and fans and advisors is also up here on the panel, Jason Sydow. He is a partner at Next 47 and also an investor and board observer with Carbon Capture Incorporated, which is aptly named. It directly the company directly captures carbon from the air and sticks it in the ground. And then finally, we have with us another huge supporter of what we're doing here in our Tri-Valley community, Debbie Haldeman Wells. She is the Director of Public Affairs, Communications, and Social Impact for a global company, Cemex, and she is responsible for all of this that's going on here in the West and Southwest. So I'd like to start off, I think, actually with you, Debbie, if you could just, and I'll ask each of you to do the same thing, to just talk a little bit about, just briefly, what does your company do, and why are you laser focused on decarbonizing your company's activities and industry?
Absolutely. Can you hear me? There we go. Well, hello, everyone. Thank you very much for having me on this panel today. So some of you may be familiar with who Cemex is. We are a global manufacturing company of building materials, specifically focused on cement, concrete, aggregates, and urbanization solutions. And right here in California, we have multiple operations, including a cement plant in the Mojave Desert in Southern California. We have a quarry here in Livermore, up 680 in the Clayton area, and we have ready mix batch plants all over the state, and we also operate out of 3 marine terminals. So that kind of gives you the footprint of who we are in the state of California. Why is decarbonization important? So, our purpose is to build a better future, right? We provide sustainable building materials and solutions. And decarbonization is essential for future generations. But we also recognize, there's an inherent carbon footprint in our production processes. And so decarbonization is a high priority and has been for many years in our operations. Concrete, and just real quick education, cement is an ingredient in concrete. They get used interchangeably quite a bit. So cement is the powder, it's the binder that gets mixed in with sand, gravel, and water, and then that becomes concrete, which you use out there for buildings and highways and bridges and so forth. So concrete is actually the most widely used man-made material in the world. It is essential for the built environment, for our society, for the development and growth of our future. But also we have to look at the opportunities for climate change mitigation and reducing our carbon emissions in our production processes. And Cemex is doing that. And I'll go into that a little bit later specifically. But we have very ambitious goals as a company to get to become a net zero company by 2050 globally and 2045 here in the state of California, with very ambitious metrics by 2030. We are a leader in this industry worldwide. We will continue to be a leader and influence the industry for the benefit of all.
Thank you, Debbie. And I'm going to move to you, Matin, if you could just talk a little bit again about your company, what it does, and why you're laser focused on decarbonization.
Sure. So Rushnew is, we have a vision I personally been in climate for the past 2 decades, so both in academic and industrial side. And one of the things that I realized after like going through all of this, researches and a scale up, was that industries are facing a challenge that is basically mentioned in one of the talks by Jennifer, is more incentive, like having the incentives to decarbonize their operation. So it's not only to force them to decarbonize, but they should have the incentive to do it. So we have the vision to create this incentive for the company. What does that mean? So just focusing on the carbon capture side. So we see a lot of emission coming from industrial facilities, but is it only because they want to do that, like they want to basically emit all of these emissions, or there is no alternative for them? So we have a technology that basically make the decarbonization financially viable for them. And that's the vision we have. And the reason we created this is all because of the passion for the climate. And now basically we have started this into 2022 with just an idea that was validated in the lab space that we basically rented out of Daybreak Lab last year. We filed our patent. This year we are moving toward basically doing our first field project, real project that bring this technology to the market.
Thank you. And now your turn, Jason.
Sure. Happy to be here. Happy to answer questions both now and later on throughout the day. As the pet venture capitalist in the group. Next 47, it's kind of a weird name. It comes from the fact that all of our money comes from Siemens, the German industrial company that has done many, many things over the 150 plus years of its existence. In the electrical space, in the gas turbine space, in the medical imaging space, in the train space. The Muni trains in San Francisco are built up in Sacramento at a Siemens facility, for example. Next 47 makes technology investments to help Siemens move from a capital equipment company to a technology company. That's our mandate. We do everything from enterprise software predominantly, but also frontier tech investing. And specifically to today's topic, we help Siemens make investments out of a 50 million euro negative emissions technology fund that they have. And so they're looking at and have invested both in the US and Europe in direct air capture companies such as Carbon Capture Incorporated in Southern California. Another direct air capture company, one of the larger leading ones, it's not yet announced yet, but it's kind of nearby. And then about 5 other investments in Europe. Mostly in carbon capture, but also enhanced rock weathering and other types of technologies. Siemens is doing that because they have a net zero target commitment for 2030. They're taking a lot of steps to decarbonize their business across the board, but they also know that they're going to be in the carbon credit purchase market in order to achieve that. So like many companies, particularly Amazon, Microsoft, and some others, they are looking for ways to get early access and a foot in the door for these companies like Carbon Capture and others that are making carbon credits.
Great, thank you. And I think it's such an interesting twist to have a investment fund that is. I mean, the way I got to know you is through SaaS, right? Like your investment in SaaS, and this twist to really leapfrog into getting carbon credits via actually investing directly into hard technology, which is an unusual move for a fund. So, and I think that just speaks to the importance of the problem that we're trying to solve. And also the importance of, like Matin said, incentives. And I'm wondering, Matin, if you could follow up with and talk a little bit about what specifically you're doing to create the incentives, and maybe touch on some of the recent partnerships that you've made in order to do that.
So right now, there are certain industries that are focusing on carbon capture, oil and gas, because they have money, but that's not, I mean, to my opinion and to my experience, that wouldn't changing anything like in the future, because it's not all about investing, but making something that is real and profitable is what makes sense. Because it's not, industries are not only oil and gas, it's ag, is water treatment, is steel industries. Not all of them have the luxury of that money, the funding to invest in those projects. So right now, like existing technologies, the most commercially available carbon capture technologies are CCS, is basically two-step capturing the CO2 from a gas, which is a flue gas, any stream of CO2, and then storing that underground. And that is reliant only on the government subsidies, basically the government to pay them as a tax credit to become financially viable. So what we do, we actually do that carbon capture, but we integrate that with production of the chemicals that are reusable by the customers, by the host. One of the recent partnership that we announced was with City of Livermore. So the conversation, when we started the conversation with City of Livermore, we realized exactly that challenge. The challenge of investing in certain technologies that decarbonize their facility is something good to have, but is not all they can do. It's not top priority at the moment. So the way that we changed the pitch to them was, okay, we do decarbonize their facility, but we create these chemicals that you're now paying to buy from other suppliers. We produce that on site at much lower price. And that was one thing that basically make them to become interested in the partnership with us. We did the same partnership with 2 other customers. Right now we are negotiating with one of the largest sanitation district in Los Angeles. We also started a partnership with Silicon Valley Clean Water in Redwood City. So that means that, like, if you have a technology that can basically make this profitable, scalable for the customer, then that wouldn't be a question for the customer why you want to basically bring this technology to my facility or something like that. And that's what we are trying to do. We are not trying to only do this for water treatment, but we also have conversations started with the steel industries, because our technology is flexible. We can produce feedstock that is used in a steel manufacturing process. We can produce chemicals that is used in other industries like chemical industries, polymer industries. So we are trying to grow, but we started with water treatment because we saw like this is an industry that really need this.
Great, thank you. So it sounds like what you're doing is trying to create something that's self-sustaining for companies, for industry to use, because your process actually creates value for them, not just the removal of the carbon, but also a revenue stream or reduction in cost of operations. Like you've already successfully partnered with the City of Livermore wastewater treatment and Silicon Valley wastewater.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's amazing. And Debbie, can you talk about, I know Cemex is doing a lot. So please tell us about it.
Well, to ensure our commitments, we have established a program that we refer to as Future in Action. And what that does is concentrate around 6 pillars. These pillars are what we've developed as a roadmap to get to our decarbonization and goals. And if I could just run through them, I'll be brief. So the first one is we call sustainable products and solutions. And so what that means is we are providing low carbon products to market. We have our own branded low carbon concrete, for example, called Virtua. And it can vary in the levels of reduced CO2 emissions, but it can go up to 70% reductions in CO2 emissions depending on the mix design and the application. And as an example, we've used more than 1 million cubic yards of concrete, or virtual concrete, here in the San Francisco greater metropolitan area. And then also that includes SCMs, which are supplemental cementitious materials. So those are maybe industrial byproducts from other industries, such as slag or fly ash, which are steel and coal, respectively. Our second pillar is called decarbonization of our operations, and that's where we're really focused around developing carbon capture, carbon capture storage type projects. We're looking at developing that type of facility at our Victorville plant, in fact, where our cement plant is. But it also includes alternative fuels, and they touched on biomass earlier, and biomass can be an alternative fuel for us in our combustion process. So we rely less on fossil fuels, as well as municipal solid waste. So there's lots of opportunities to be using alternative fuels in the combustion process to reduce our reliance on fossil fuels. Also under decarbonization, we're looking at renewable energies, electrification, and some other things like that. And then the third one is a circular economy that kind of wraps these all together, like reusing non-recyclable waste materials, which, like I said, could be an industrial waste, a municipal waste, an industrial byproduct. How do we reuse those and put those back into the economy? So we're reducing our waste overall. And then innovation and partnerships. So kind of similar to what these gentlemen are talking about up here on stage, we have our own venture capital company called Cemex Ventures, and we invest in startup companies that are looking to more efficiencies in the construction industry, in decarbonization opportunities. We partner with academia or other non-governmental or even governmental entities to develop solutions under decarbonization initiatives. And then lastly, promoting a green economy, advocating for a greener economy. And what does that look like, and what does it need? Is it working with our policymakers and our regulators, or is it working with academia? So just really promoting that, keeping a sustainable economy, utilizing all the things I just mentioned to promote that green economy. And then I'll just say, I referred to our decarbonization goals earlier. We are validated, our goals, and you can look at our website, cemexusa.com, but we have validated our decarbonization goals through science-based target initiatives, and they align with the Paris Agreement objectives. So I would invite you to look in that more so on our website.
Thank you. Thank you. So you highlighted an enormous number of activities that Cemex is involved in, and it's really heartening because Cemex is a global company and producing a very necessary material. And I think to the point of what one of the speakers said earlier is, people aren't interested in solutions that nobody cares about, and the idea of eliminating something is unrealistic. And I think what you highlighted is how your industry has identified what can be done and is working really hard on approaching every single element of that. I'd like to, move back to you, Jason. And if you talked a little bit, obviously investment is one of the primary tools for Next 47 to achieve its goals. But I'm curious if you can talk a little bit about how are you going about with the tools that you have to get to net zero?
Okay. How are we going about getting to net zero? The quick and unresponsive answer to that is the investment itself, right? Helping these innovative startups at the Series A level, so pretty early, high risk capital, to see if they can get their proof of concepts to start scaling. I agree with the earlier speaker. She said, even the most advanced of these companies like Climeworks and Heirloom and Carbon Engineering on the direct air capture side, which is the space I happen to know the most about. Not saying it's the only right way to do it by any means. They're all still in the early days, and it will be much, much larger, 2, 3, maybe 4 orders of magnitude more in terms of the scale of these facilities to have the effect that's needed. And a lot more improvements on the efficiency. The energy, you can do some really easy back in the envelope calculations on how much thermodynamic energy you need to pull carbon out of the atmosphere. It's kind of a college chemistry question. And if you're doing it all through that, it's about 1/5 of the world's energy production, which is just not going to happen, right? We tend to go to war pretty quick over 0.5% of the world's energy production. So I don't see personkind making that kind of a change fast enough. So we need other ways. We need to get that energy down, so spreading risk capital as far as wide as possible is the way we do that. What I would ask the people in the audience to do to help the venture capital community do that is think about the policy and regulatory realities, because I've been doing venture capital for almost 20 years. I was around for Clean Tech 1.0 in the early aughts, which was an abject failure from a venture capital perspective, in large degree because of regulatory problems. On the one hand, half of venture capital goes to tech, media tech and things of that nature, highly unregulated, highly successful. So there's an argument there that VCs do best where there aren't regulations, and I think that's a valid argument. On the other hand, the other half of venture capital that does very well is in the healthcare space. Very regulated, obviously, but somehow or another they figure it out. Not me, I've never been in that part, but I know it's possible. I haven't seen it work in clean tech. I haven't seen it work in energy at a large scale to any sort of significant degree. But it needs to if we want to have the kind of innovations that this transition is going to require. So figuring out how we make the regulatory environment for this look more like healthcare, whatever that means, I don't know, but such that startups can be successful as opposed to crash and burn as they've done in the past in clean tech is a task still to be done from what I've seen.
Thank you so much, Jason. And that kind of brings me into a question I'd like to ask Matin, which is related similarly to what challenges and opportunities do you see next for Rushnu, and what kind of help do you need to overcome the challenges or to fuel the opportunity?
So a short answer to this question is time. So everything is about time for a startup. So we are running to develop a technology, do R&D, do a scale up, do sales, and it's all by small team. At the same time, we are trying to manage our runway. So being able to bring this technology to the market as soon as possible, finding right customers, finding right investors, these are all of the challenges that I think it's not only for Rushnu, but for any climate startups, especially at this time, like after the election and everything. So everything is become more challenging for us, but we just have to find a way to survive.
And am I right in thinking some of what gives you time is money?
Money is part of it, yeah. Not everything, but yeah. So,
so maybe funding from sources like the state or the country.
Everything is related. So it's when you go for fundraising, you should have proof of technology. You should have proof of customer. So you need to work on all of these angles at the same time. And of course, money is one of the things that is on top of head of any entrepreneurs, funders.
And it's one of the things Matin said to me early on that I think is a great saying, and I say it now all the time, and it's one that runs parallel both for startups or any new technology development, as well as the problem we're trying to solve here with decarbonization. And time is the enemy. And we need to really, I think we have in this discussion a lot of the resources, the sources of resources that can help reduce that. And so that's such a great point. And I'm curious for you, Debbie, challenges, opportunities, and what do you need to mitigate the challenges or overcome them, and what what kind of fuel do you need to get to the opportunities faster? If time is the enemy, what shortens that for you?
Well, that is one of our challenges as well. But I'll start with the opportunities. Actually, we had a recent success working with, or I should say, with Senate Bill 596, which was the carbon neutrality bill for the cement industry that the governor signed in 2021. And I call that a success because they invited, the senator, the sponsor, invited us to the table as an industry and worked with us on creating a bill that we could end up supporting as an industry. And then ultimately the governor signed it. So that started in 2021. And that really opened up opportunities for CEMEX and industry to explore real solutions on how, okay, now we have our time frame, like timing, we have the timeline. Okay, now we need to get to work on how are we going to implement this certain milestones as we reach 2045. And it gave us, again, that seat at the table with policymakers, with the regulators, with the NGOs, and others, who are active in that space, and working together to develop what the strategy will be, what the solutions need to be, and are they attainable and achievable, which are also very important. And then we had even more recent success with Assembly Bill 2109 this year that the governor did just sign as well. And it was just one of the many strategies that are going to help us get there to carbon neutrality. And it was our industrial heat recovery bill. And basically what that was saying, it is allowing cement industry and other industries, but we were focused on the cement industry, of course, to capture the heat that we already generate and reuse that into energy generation for our on-site needs. And so that was a huge success as ticking away at getting to that carbon neutrality. But as barriers, so speaking of that, so there are the opportunities, there are barriers to get there as well. Permitting, we talked about that a couple times earlier in the session. So permitting, lots of challenges, and I don't need to go into them because we've already talked about some of them. They're the same for us as well in achieving some of those milestones for carbon neutrality. And then I would say regulatory oversight. And what I mean, or lack thereof, to be honest, there's regulatory agencies that are responsible for implementing the strategies, defining the strategy, and then the state agencies don't even agree, and they compete with each other, and so it gets. And then it takes a lot of time, and then timing not implementing the strategies. So what do we have to permit to? I mean, it kind of just snowballs, right? And so that's another, I think a real challenge that we have out there. And, we're going to need some legislative action for all of these. We do have barriers to get to carbon neutrality, and I won't go into them, and I can answer questions later. But we're probably going to need some legislative policy to help us remove some of those barriers in the future. And then lastly, I'll just mention emerging technologies. There's, we heard about some of them today, but there's emerging technologies in our industry, and they're wonderful and they're really innovative ideas, but they're not to scale, and they're not going to be to scale for the demand in the near future, or even the midterm future. And so I think there's lots of opportunity to continue to look at those emerging technologies. And what I mean by that is they're substitutions for the products that we make, basically, to be utilized in concrete or other aspects of this industry. But people need to realize they're not at scale, and the demand far out exceeds what they are able to produce right now.
Thank you so much. I think we have time for a few questions.
Anybody have any questions for our panelists? Yeah, great.
Hi, this question's for Debbie. I was wondering if you've looked at biochar in your concrete, and you also touched a little bit on biomass, and I'm wondering how you touched on it, but I was wondering if you could expand a little bit on how you're thinking of biomass in your strategy. which one of the byproducts of is biochar as well as energy. But biochar is something that has been researched quite a bit in concrete. So just wondering if you can talk at all about that.
I'm not a scientist, so let me start with that. So I'll do the best I can. The biochar, are you talking about carbon being injected into concrete? Is that what you're referring to?
Yeah, biochar is carbon.
The carbon being injected.
This was something that I wanted to ask Jennifer, but there wasn't time for questions. But she talks a lot about CO2 sequestration as a gas, but we have shovel-ready carbon sequestration in biochar. Also, it can be used on farms for water uptake. When Jennifer talked a bit about the challenges in the valley, and first and foremost, it's water, not decarbonizing. So biochar is shovel-ready carbon sequestration. We monetize it through corks, through carbon credits. And I've talked to a few concrete or cement producers about biochar as a substitute for example, sand in their cement mix. And so I was just curious if Cemex has played around with that at all. And maybe it's not your wheelhouse where you sit, but it did, when you talked about your pillars, it was definitely in that first pillar. And so I was just curious if you've thought at all about it as a company.
I personally, I will just be honest, I'm not super well versed in that particular topic, but I do know that we have been exploring those type of opportunities. But I can certainly circle back with you and get with our technical team. As far as biomass as an alternative fuel, so we use coal and pet coke in the combustion process of heating our kilns. The kiln gets heated up to 2,500 degrees Fahrenheit, and then that is where the chemical reaction from limestone to clinker occurs. And the clinker is the product that becomes cement, the powder of cement. So when I talk about using biomass as an alternative fuel, we already are. I mean, we already use agriculture waste, we use nutshells, we do use municipal solid waste, but there's opportunities to increase that. In Europe, in our plants in Europe, for example, 70% of our fuel is coming from alternative fuel sources, including biomass and municipal solid waste. And so that's being diverted from going to the landfills and then being used as an alternative to that reliance on fossil fuels. So there's a tremendous opportunity. There's some logistics issues with getting biomass to our facilities, but I think that we can overcome those obstacles, but there's a tremendous opportunity to increase the use of biomass, as an alternative fuel at our cement facilities.
Good morning or afternoon at this point, whatever it is. But this would be specific for, I think, Jason, but all panelists are welcome to answer it. From a regulatory perspective and a policy perspective, if you had the proverbial magic wand, what are like the top 3 areas that you would want to change in order to increase venture capital investment security in this space? And I'm saying that because on the flip side of that, regulatory policies have also been a driver towards increasing our path for carbon neutrality. So, and full caveat, I work for a legislator, so I'm very interested on our aspect on this very self-serving question, what we could do to increase venture capitalism and investment in this space.
Okay. I love the question. I love the motivation that's behind it. It makes me feel bad I can't give you a better answer because I don't have, I haven't gone deep into the policy and regulatory change. It varies a lot around the world, around the states, and this is obviously a global challenge. So I can't give you kind of here are 3 silver bullets answers. As someone who has been doing venture capital for 20 years on both the East Coast and the West Coast, and has some thoughts about the differences between tech and healthcare and why those two play out differently, and also has lived all around the country, including here in California for the past decade, because this, of course, is the center of at least North America for venture capital and startups. Regardless of what people want to think, it always comes back to here as the cycle continues to roll. But the thing I would encourage people to do is get out of California some. One of the disconnects on policy and regulation and just kind of world view that strikes me the most is that really well-educated, well-traveled peers of mine on both sides of the funding table have no clue to what goes on in the rest of the country and how special in good and bad ways California is. We do great stuff with the startup community because of, it's the innovation capital of the world. It's the immigration capital of the world. These are tremendous positives. It's the regulatory pit of the world, right? And we're fortunate that those two counterbalance. But I was having a conversation in the beginning where someone was talking about how awesome it is that the cost of power is so much cheaper in the SMUT region, because it's 25 cents versus 49 cents. I grew up in Virginia. My father-in-law is still paying 5.5 cents, okay? Everything's relative, and California has really kind of got one of the more insular views, and when it comes to policy and regulation, that's a detriment. So get people to get out of the state, and then come back and do amazing things. But I'm not worried they'll do that because it's a great place to live.
Thank you. Do we have time for another question?
I have one, Yoli, sorry. So, and maybe addressing some of the previous question, I think the best policies broadly try to address negative externalities, things like climate, carbon, but create really clear rules of the road that people can follow. And I think your comment, Jason, about the heavily regulated healthcare field, healthcare normally doesn't interact with CEQA very much. Outside of the permitting of the hospital itself, most of the regulation doesn't have a public input component to it. And I think that's a major challenge that decarbonization and climate tech has to face, which is companies come in. In fact, that heirloom project in Tracy tried to make a stop in Livermore and couldn't. And part of that was the property owner, but some of it too is just having shovel-ready areas where companies that are doing demonstration projects, because as Matin said, time is like oxygen for these companies. Do you have a space? Can we create a space where these companies can come in and say, I need to be up and running in 6 months on a demonstration project because I have a VC who's waiting for the results of that data to be able to decide on go, no go, or I've got a state grant I'm applying for. And so I think I guess it's sort of a question, but I think more of an observation that I'd like you to object to if you do is, if we had in this region an area, a piece of land that was ready to go for these kinds of companies, whether it's Matin's company or a direct air capture company or whatever it is, that had gone through the permitting, that had done the CEQA analysis, that you basically could flip on immediately for a company, would that be a major attractant for these kinds of companies into the area, especially combined with workforce development and other kinds of training opportunities?
If it has 100% clean energy. One of my other portfolio companies, Carbon Capture Incorporated, about 6 months ago opened up their manufacturing facility in Tempe, Arizona. And the lead reason they were still happy with that, even though they lost out on part of the sequestration attractant that was taking them to Arizona, was the fact that they were able to move to the front of the line and get 100% clean energy commitment from SRP, Salt River Project, the energy provider in Arizona. And it's because Arizona is a big state that can act like a small state from getting things done. And so finding ways to get California to act like a smaller state where it really matters, land is one, energy is the other, clean energy.
Is that I don't know that California is ever going to be capable of that, but I wonder about
you can always get
regions.
better.
Yeah,
right?
Absolutely. Directionality matters, but I guess I'm wondering, can regions and coalitions like the people that you see in this room and the organizers of this event instead act like their own version of small states, given that a lot of the regulatory authority at a land use level is what actually kills these things? It's risk aversion, it's cost, it's time, it's all of that kind of stuff. And if you can get out ahead of that and say, we're creating this purpose-built environment, like the Momentum project up in Contra Costa County for transportation technology is an example of this too. We're building a purpose-built environment for this industry to attract small startups here. The environment's ready, come in, turn it on, build your company here.
No, absolutely. And if my answer to good energy as well sounded like I was undermining the benefit of shovel-ready land, that was not the intention. Getting the basically clear running room from a real estate perspective is a huge positive and worth doing more of. Because that was, visiting sites was the first step for when CCI was looking, and that's all about the land, the real estate. And I was just giving you and if you want to what next, it's that I've seen over and over these clean energy these carbon capture startups, they've got to get clean electrons. Otherwise they're just, burning natural gas to make steam to do their processes, and it's kind of silly. So yes, land for sure. Next step, or the next greatest thing too, is the energy side.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, guys.